Good day. Welcome to Daily Critical. Please like and subscribe. A brief rundown of recent events for March 22nd, 2025. The energy ceasefire proposed and agreed to in the Putin Trump call this week has met with a sizable and predictable roadblock. As Putin suggested in the meeting, the greater concern he has is the inability of the Zelensky government to hold to agreements. Citing past duplicity, now it appears to be a well-founded position. With Ukraine attacking the Russian Sudzha gas metering station in the Russian Kursk Oblast on March 21st, where they had been actively retreating, in contravention of the agreement to refrain from energy infrastructure attacks reached earlier this week. The Sudzha station is a key transit node for Russian gas supplies to the EU. While popular opinion is that Europe has cut off all energy commerce with Russia, in fact, EU imports of Russian fossil fuels in the third year of the invasion surpassed financial aid sent to Ukraine, according to a February report by the CREA. Quote, the EU paid 21.9 billion euros for Russian fossil fuel imports in the third year of the invasion, a mere 1% year-on-year reduction in volume. The EU Russian imports in the third year of the invasion surpassed the 18.7 billion euros of financial aid sent to Ukraine in 2024. Certainly a remarkable set of facts. The suggestion that now Trump will see the irresponsibility of the Zelensky government is really more of a surface argument. American diplomatic channels, and even Trump himself, has been signaling for some time their lack of trust of the Ukrainian position. There have been subtle remarks regarding potential changes in leadership there, and one can simply assume that those changes would promote more peace-conductive leadership. There is some suggestion that nationalist forces in Ukraine are resistant to Kiev leadership seeking peace, perhaps violently so. The Russian government's stated intent at the start of the war, citing demilitarization and a cleansing of nationalist power from the Ukraine, becomes more relevant as the conflict matures toward its end. Clearly, the regime is in a regression, with limited support from the US and Europe struggling to maintain a supportive stance financially. The Russian perspective of a continued fight to eliminate the negative political and military elements of the Ukraine is less obstructed by the West every day. EU and UK proposals to both fund further war efforts fell flat this week as one member state after another dropped support. At this year's European Council meetings, which takes place every year in March, the EU reaffirmed its commitment to the concept of a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. Aside from relevant peace demands and tangible humanitarian expectations such as prisoners of war, civilian infrastructure, children, ceasefire support, etc., the European Council signaled a toned-down rhetoric regarding the unlawful use of Russian frozen assets, particularly to place the onus on Russia to compensate for war damages via its own means, effectively holding the assets as a kind of collateral. As far as actual military defense of Ukraine, the security guarantees called out in their March 20 EU release indicate several times that the vector through which Ukraine is defended is with its own military, contrary to recent rhetoric from the UK about a coalition of the willing with boots on the ground, etc. The black and white indications are that Europe feels Ukraine should defend itself with the support of member states, but not by them. Additionally, financing to Ukraine via the Ukraine facility, a single pathway for financial support from member states to Ukraine for the 2023 to 2027 timeframe, 33 billion euro in loans and 17 in grants, of which 2.9 billion has already been provided. The details and description of this funding indicates its use in reconstruction, recovery, and modernization, and not military. Lastly, there is some verbiage assigned to moving Ukraine closer to EU member state status. EU defense actions outlined on March 6 white paper spell out a 5-year framework for Europe self-realized defense as a complement to NATO. There is considerable debate regarding the funding of NATO, this new European Defense Agreement, and the defense of the Ukraine. Reports indicate that the pet project of Kaya Kallas to provide 40 billion euros has been ground down due to a lack of initial backroom channeling. The proposal by European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaya Kallas could mean a doubling of EU military support for the Ukraine in its war against Russia's invasion, as the bloc and its members give some 20 billion euros in 2024. The divide within the Union has been between Hungary and the southern member states, with the recent French, Italian, Spanish, and Slovakian voices declining. It indicates the Europeans are fragmented, perhaps more so than originally believed, in part due to pressure from the departing American support. A much reduced €5 billion plan was also of no interest, as member states suggested any support be by voluntary, non enforceable, and therefore without teeth. So France will host a Ukraine summit later this week. We'll have to see how that goes. It's clear at this point that the Europeans' largest economies, after Germany, those being France, Italy, and Spain, are taking a wait and see position while America works its diplomatic first steps with Russia. This also presumes a support for peace, which would be derailed by continual military provisions and escalations. As the American peace process evolves, the likelihood of a wide European support for this effort will grow, with the realization that the US is establishing a greater foothold in relations with Russia and stands to come out of the conflict as a greater player in European affairs. This should inspire Europe to drop the pretense and to diplomatically establish its own control in continental affairs. Spanish leadership became embroiled in debate after suggesting a more prepared envoy be established to negotiate the Ukraine situation in a more multilateral European measure. Additionally, with Spain president criticizing the EU plan to raise up to 800 billion euros to rearm Europe, quote, the challenges that we face in the southern neighborhood are a bit different from the ones on the eastern flank. Sanchez said, suggesting that the defense of Europe, its threats, and its costs are not equally relevant by geography. An interesting development is the announcement of a future deployment of a survival guide to the French citizens. This raises some eyebrows, suggesting the government of Europe's biggest military industry is expecting trouble of a sort that requires every citizen to mobilize on some level. The obvious political manufacturing of consent here is to perhaps leverage the Russian military action in Ukraine towards some form of greater fear, establishing a support of the populace and a less resistant stance to the increased spending that government plans to support the proposed 800 billion euro account, an amount reasonably closer to Americans' annual defense spending than any other region has seen. For good reason, as with American support dwindling in Europe and a trade war in full swing, the opportunity for France to supply a substantial amount of military hardware economically improves their future, France being the world's number 2 exporter of major weapons after America. France, Germany, Italy, the UK, Netherlands, Poland, and Spain equate to 29% of the world's exported weapons market share as of 2024. Remarkably, American military spending as a percentage of GDP ranks 3.4% in 2023, which at least 8 countries are higher only one of which is in NATO.